Hey, and welcome back to Blender. I'm your tutorial man Spencer, and let's get started with this. So, we've got our traffic cone. It's got some lovely textures on it that y'all did. By the way, the only difference between this scene and the other one is that I've kind of extended the irradiance volume so I could make a thumbnail for the video, but don't worry if if it looks any different. So we've got ourselves a nice traffic cone, and we've got ourselves a nice traffic cone texture. So what's next? Well, we got to texture all the rest of these bad boys, huh? We got to make them look unique and special. Now, we can't paint all of these cones, right? Even though we've only got like 4 base cones, it doesn't really make sense to go and like do that entire process for all 4 of them. We could, and we could even reuse the other texture to work on these ones, but I don't want to do that because I'm lazy. And I think that there is a way to have a texture for all of these and even all of these without having to do that much work. And that's called procedural texturing. So what I'm going to do is I am going to head into the shading workspace up here, this tab. And as you can see, we got a somewhat different view of our environment, and that's because our environment is in something called look dev mode. Look dev just means look development mode. It's a version of Eevee that runs with some slight alterations, like the lighting doesn't work, like if you move this around it doesn't really affect anything. Glass is weird, like if you add in a glass material it just doesn't really work properly. But most importantly, it renders everything with a sample piece of lighting called an HDRI. An HDRI, for those of you who don't know, is a high dynamic range image, which is a type of picture file that basically you like take a picture of one thing and then you like lower the level of light intake, and you take another picture and you lower it, and you keep doing that like up and down to make sure that you can like capture a good range of light levels in the image, so you can see like, okay, what parts are brighter, what parts are darker, and so on. And you stitch all of those together to create something. And in 3D work, a lot of times people do that with like 360 images. So you'll take an image on a 360, you'll lower the light level or raise it, take another one and stitch that together, and then you get this kind of dynamic image file that can say like, this is what's bright and this is what isn't. It's also really useful for telling you where like the reflections are. And what light will be like bouncing around without actually having to model any of the things. Like if we're looking down here in the corner, we can kind of see like there are some trees around, but we don't actually have to model any trees or any of the like ground or anything like that. We can just get that lighting by loading in this image. So, sorry, my friends are in another tab right now arguing about Tarzan. Because this morning one of them was like, hey, why doesn't Tarzan have any body hair? And somebody else said, oh, it's because Tarzan doesn't grow any. We had like a big argument, and they're continuing it while I'm trying to record this tutorial and focus. So if I seem distracted right now, it's because I'm thinking about how stupid my friends are, because they think that Tarzan, oh my god, I'm sorry, I'm so mad. I hate them so much. You ever like meet somebody and you're like, how on earth are you allowed to like vote? How is it that you can decide part of our future? You are so dumb. And like, I love my friends, but I do not think they should be allowed to vote. Anyways, we've got our Look Dev tab. The other thing that Look Dev tab has is this area down here, which is called the shading workspace, shader editor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select one of our traffic cones, and as you can see, we've got these nodes. We talked a little bit about nodes before, but this time we're actually going to talk more about nodes. By the way, I'm going to like get rid of this area here by clicking on the corner and dragging it over, and I'm going to get rid of this area here by clicking on this corner and dragging it over. That's something you can do. So nodes are by default the best part of Blender, in my opinion. Basically, they are what allows you to control how a material looks. So I do like a lot of silly stuff with nodes. We've only kind of scratched the surface with it by like setting a base color, but there is a lot of other stuff that you can do. And I am just going to show you around. So with these auxiliary cones, we basically just got like the default principled BSDF plugged in with the orange color set to orange. If we look at our hero cone, we can see that we have actually got basically the same thing, except for that we've got sort of this texture, this image texture plugged in. So the difference between that is that you can plug in image textures to your thing here, and that can kind of make it look nice and good. They're ridiculous. I'm sorry. I hate them so much. So with our principled cone, we have this sort of hero texture, but with these, we want to kind of create procedural ones. Hey Spencer, what does procedural mean? You've been using that word a lot. I don't understand it. That's okay. It's fine. You don't have to understand everything. Procedural just means that it's like non-human generated. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to select this texture right here, which is like the rubber texture for the cone, and I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to search for texture. And here we have like a lot of different kinds of textures. We've got like sky texture, wave texture, brick texture, noise texture. I'm going to go for noise texture. Noise texture is the one that we're going to use here. And by the way, so that we can preview our nodes, I'm going to go up to Preferences, and I'm going to type in Node Wrangler. I've already got it installed by default, but it's very useful. Node Wrangler is basically an add-on that just lets you, it gives you a little bit more control over your nodes. So if, like, for example, if I press Control, Shift, and then click, it will assign a viewer, which is basically just plugging this straight in, and it lets you see what we're doing with the node. So here we've got a noise texture, and a noise texture is essentially an algorithm made by a guy called Dan Perlin that will just kind of create random values between 0 and 1, or you can plug in the color. So like I could take this and plug it in, and it will generate random values along the color wheel. But I don't particularly care about that right now. I'm going to take the factor, which is just that but black and white, and play with that instead. So noise creates noise. How are we going to use this? Well, what I'm going to do is I am going to just add something called a color ramp. And what a color ramp does is it essentially takes all of the colors that go into its factor port and converts them to any two colors that we have like between here. So for example, I could set this to be like blue, and I could set this to be red, and then all of a sudden we would kind of get like a mixture between that. But one of the other things you can do with the color ramp is you can kind of clamp the values a little bit. So if I were to take this and I were to raise it, we would start seeing more things that are blue. And if I were to take this value and lower it, we would start seeing more things that are red. And most importantly, we wouldn't be seeing any of the in-between. So cool, we've got this. How can we use it? Well, what we can do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to turn it to be white. So I'm going to take the saturation, I'm just going to say 0. Then I'm going to take this and I'm going to turn it to be black. I'm going to take the saturation to 0 and the value to 0. And what this gives us is a nice like set of values. So this feeds into a sort of ancient VFX principle where black becomes 0 and white becomes 1. So when we've got these areas of the traffic cone that are defined by this set of colors, what we can do is we can say, all right, this area will become 1 and this area will become 0. And the gray values will be like mixed between that. So what I can do is I can take this image and I can map the like black values to one thing, and I can map the white values to another thing. So if I were to take a mix RGB node and then plug that in, and I would say that this is the factor, what I can do is I can set this to be red and I can set this to be blue. And just like that, we've sort of used our noise texture to drive procedural texturing. But this isn't really the procedural texturing that I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want color 1 to be this. I want it to be like the usual sort of traffic cone color that we've got going on. And I want color 2 to be like a kind of darker orange so that we can use it as dirt. And there you go. Now we've got ourselves a kind of dirty traffic cone. But I'm not sure if I like this kind of dirt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play around with the noise texture. Maybe I'll make it the scale higher, I'll lower the roughness, or I'll raise the roughness, or I could play with the color ramp values to kind of make it so that our dirt is a little bit less pronounced or more evenly spread out, so that we get this kind of look instead. And that can kind of work for me, but I think what I want to do is I'm going to just make another noise texture, and I'm going to plug this into color 2. So that way I've got this one noise texture with like the really sort of broad strokes of like I want this area over here to be, you know, like textured as noise, and I've got this one that I can control more finely. So I can say, actually, you know, I can set the noise to be like this, and then I can run this through a color ramp and say I want the white values to be this orange value, and I want the black values to be like kind of a dark brown value. So I can take this, I can color pick this, and then I can take this and I can color pick like something darker like that. And that way, the areas that are kind of dark are a little bit more textured, and I can sort of switch these around a bit so that I can get a little bit more detail there. And then what I can do is I can like crank up the detail, I can crank up the scale a little bit to make it look better, something like that. And you can see like pretty immediately how this can be useful if we just put like a little bit of time and care into making sure that it looks nice. So for example, I might make it so that the like fall off is a little bit more or less pronounced. And I also might take color 1 and instead of mixing it to a straight orange, I'm going to do another noise texture. And I'm going to do another color ramp, and I'm going to mix it between like different versions of the color orange. So I'll take this and I'll just kind of grab the same orange but not quite. So like this, but then like I'll make it a little bit more red or something like that, and then I'll raise the scale, I think, so that I can get kind of a better look there. And then I'll like lower the detail or something. I'll lower the roughness. So that way we get traffic cones that look a lot more like there's something else. But I can pretty clearly tell that all of these are a fair bit darker than the other ones. What gives it that? Well, that's because we're still plugged into the viewer. And what the viewer is doing is it's taking this RGB information and it's just feeding it straight into the output instead of what we want it to do, which is take it and run it through a shader, because a shader is basically how the program decides how light is going to affect it. So once I drag this principled BSDF through, you can see that all of a sudden we're getting some nice results. Or at least once the shaders load. Sometimes it will take a while. So there we go. We're getting some results that are a little bit more consistent. However, something is bothering me, and that's the fact that all of the like textures are kind of looking pretty similar. If only there was a way to truly randomize it. Well, there is. So right now the function that the noise texture is using is 3D, which means that it's operating in 3D space. But we can set it to something called 4D, which will allow it will give us this one extra variable called W. And what W is basically just saying which element of 4D space is it going through. So if I were to move W around, you can see that I'm moving around sort of the different values. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set all these noise textures to work with 4D, and then I'm going to add in another node called object info. And object info gives us a really, really good node called random. So what I can do is I can plug random into the W value here, and I can plug random into this, and all of a sudden the values for that will be truly randomized, or at least as randomized as this computer can get without referencing like lava lamps. But now we've got all of these traffic cones, which all have ever so slightly different variations of color and dirt on them, which is good. That's what we want. So when we head over here, we can see, cool. From there, we can kind of play around with these values a little bit to make the dirt more pronounced or less pronounced if that's something you want. I might crank it up a little bit. I might take this and just kind of set it aside, something like that. And maybe I'll move up the roughness so that it looks like a little bit dirtier or something. Or at least like the dirt looks less blurry, because I think that's a thing that I'm experiencing right now and I don't like it. So like make it more rough. Yeah, that's good. So cool. We've got all of these nodes with these nice colors. And by the way, I should probably explain one more thing. If you're making anything else in Blender, you might run into this problem where your texture or whatever it is that you're doing here would appear stretched. By the way, if you hold down Shift and then you add reroute by right-clicking, you can make a really handy sort of thing for your nodes to stick onto. By default, your noise texture will wrap itself around the cone however you see this. However, you can change this by adding in something called a texture coordinate node. So by the way, to add is Shift A. I know that my screencast keys are accidentally turned off, which is might have made this part a little bit frustrating. So we can add in something called a texture coordinate node, which we can plug into kind of the vector values here. So if I were to take this and I think by default it uses something called generated or object. I really like objects because it means that everything is a lot more modular. So let me just press down Shift and then right click so that I can grab this, and I'm just going to apply it to the vector coordinate of all of the noise textures right here. Texture coordinate and mapping especially are really important when you are dealing with image textures or something that you're trying to make look nice. In fact, let me show you mapping right now. So mapping is basically you can plug that on top of your UV here, and then you can use it to kind of shift around where your textures are, or how they exist, or their rotation or their scale, which is super duper useful. I use it all the time in my procedural texturing, basically whenever I get the chance. So there we go. Now we've got a nice procedural texture for our traffic cones. If you'd like, you can do something similar for the reflective cone. A lot of that can just be accomplished by taking what we have here, copying it, and then just pasting it, and grabbing that and moving it to the base color. And then what you can do is you can shift around these colors a little bit. You can say, I want this to be white, and I want this to be a darker white, something like that. And then I want this to be a white as well, and I want this to be slightly darker. No saturation, or a little bit of saturation, but not too much. And there you go. We've got ourselves a nice sort of node-based situation to make all of our traffic cones absolutely filthy. You can continue to play with the values a little bit. If you want to make them less filthy, you can drag them off in one direction, you can drag them off in the other direction. It's up to you. I'm being bothered on Instagram because I posted a saucy video a couple of days ago, and now everybody wants a piece of me. So that's the basics of procedural texturing. We're going to talk more about it tomorrow. But I just wanted to kind of give you that idea and that insight because it's my favorite part of Blender, and I hope that it can become somebody else's favorite part too. So that's all I got for today. Bye now.